everyone, this is Nithya.
And this is Shruti.
Welcome back to the Healing Space with MannMukti, where we create a safe and uplifting space to talk about mental health in South Asian communities. Today's episode is something that so many of us feel, but don't always have the words for.
We're talking about what it means to live between two worlds. So, being raised in one culture at home and a completely different one outside.
If you've ever felt like you don't fully belong anywhere, this episode's for you.
All right, so as Indian Americans or South Asians in general, we often grow up with two different value systems. So at home, we're part of our family's culture. So traditionally, South Asian culture tends to be more collectivist, which means it values more respect, obedience, and putting family first. And on the outside, when we go outside into the American culture that we're part of as well, um, this is more of an individualistic culture, which means that it values independence and self expression and putting yourself first in certain ways. And going between both these worlds can give some sort of friction sometimes. And it's really important how we deal with this so we prioritize ourselves, but we also don't upset our families. I think that's a really big thing that South Asians in general tend to worry about a lot. So, Nitya, how do you think that you've dealt with this throughout your life so far?
Yeah, so for sure, I would definitely feel like I'm different depending on whether I'm at home or at school, with the way I'm acting. I would change my behavior around my parents versus friends, and I would always feel like I can't talk about certain topics at
Mm-hmm.
home, such as maybe something mental health related or just other taboo topics
Mm-hmm.
that I would feel more comfortable talking about with my friends, but especially with some friends who weren't South Asian, I guess, they would have a different opinion on whatever it is that I was talking about, so I felt
Mm-hmm.
like I couldn't always connect with them.
Yeah.
And then I would just feel a little bit lost because I couldn't find where I fit in
Mm-hmm.
this world, because I would definitely hide parts of myself. And yeah, I would just feel too American at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I would, because I guess I'm more Americanized at school, but because of that I would feel too Indian around my friends that weren't South Asian. But yeah, so Shruti, do you think this just happens over time, or is intentional, or what do you think?
I think it's just natural because you're growing up in two different environments. You want to keep your parents happy, but you also want to be true to yourself. And I think again, what you were saying before, being able to talk about certain things with your friends, but then not being able to talk about certain things with your parents, I would find that a lot of things that are normalized in American culture, like I guess being friends with guys, uh, I guess maybe in dressing styles, what TV shows you watch, what music you listen to. These are all things that at least my parents they never came to grasp even while they've been living here. So it's kind of hard to explore things that you like or talk about things that you've been interested in sometimes with your parents because they just don't get it. But then at the same time, I think for me, I do hold certain values that are prominent in Indian culture, even though I am Indian American and I am more Americanized than my parents. Like, I would say I don't value obedience as much, but I do think I would put family first and I value a collective, more unit of a family more sometimes than in mainstream American culture it's really shown. But yeah, I think for me, it's really, I don't even know how the code switching happens. It's almost as if my mind just completely jumps to a different way of thinking when I'm at home or a different way of behaving when I'm at home. And then it just jumps to a different way of behaving outside. It's not as much of a struggle for me because I don't know. I feel like I don't have as much friction jumping between both worlds. It's something that just comes like as second nature at this point.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Me too. In high school and even like middle school, I definitely felt a little bit more struggle with that.
Mhm.
Maybe it's because like I felt like I didn't get the freedom I wanted to, or just like I couldn't be who I am. But
Mhm.
now that like we're in college, like I definitely feel like being myself more, especially when I'm not at home. So then when I am at home, like it's easier for me to like I guess go back to being like a more of like Indianized version of myself, especially like
Mhm.
around my parents. And like you said, like I definitely feel like sometimes like I am in like a box in a way. Like
Mhm.
I have to behave in like a certain way when I'm at home that like and like I wouldn't be able to behave like how I want to just because of like my parents like beliefs and stuff. And like I do respect it, but sometimes I do wish like they might be more like open to just like
Mm.
being a little bit more like modern because of the society and everything. Because like I'll see my friends' parents and they seem to be a lot more open and just like my friends can have more like open and honest conversations with them that I might not be able
Yeah.
to have. And like it's not wrong or anything because it's just based on like my parents' like beliefs, which I do get since like they went through their own struggles and everything. And it's also like changed like over time. Like they're definitely more open now than they were when I was in high school. But yeah, like over time like it's more like a natural thing than like learned, I guess. Like my code
Yeah.
switching.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think especially with the not being able to have like open and honest conversations, it feels as if you always have to appeal to your parents' values and they don't really make any effort trying to understand your own either. And I think that's for me more than like me adapting to them and adapting to American society, I think that's when things clash because they expect things to stay the same and they expect me and other people to think the same way as they do. And it's like, oh, my way is the highway a lot of the times, I think, with parents. But it's also in a way, they're holding on to Indian culture and Indian beliefs from the time that they left India. So my parents moved to the U.S. in I think around 2001, around that time, early 2000s. And so Indian society was really different back then from what it is now. And they hold a lot of the beliefs that are from that specific point in time because if you go to India now, people think a lot differently. People are a lot more modern. So it's like they're stuck in this little time capsule and they don't really interact with other people other than other Indian people their own age. So it's just like they're in this bubble where they're not able to understand different perspectives. So it does become hard. And I do think moving to college helped me deal with that more because now it's like in doses, like when I have to kind of adhere to their standards instead of like constantly all the time. And I did get my time to more explore what I wanted to do, how I wanted to dress, how like the different hobbies that I wanted to have. So coming back home, it's not as much of a struggle to adapt to them because it's not like a constant thing that used to be there as it was in high school because like even simple things like wearing makeup were such a big deal in high school because that's just something that they were not used to. But I do think now that I'm in my 20s, like I'll be 22 soon, it would be kind of ridiculous to like have such strict boundaries or like regulations on those type of things at home. But yeah, I know that you mentioned like parent sacrifices, and that is a big thing that people love to talk about. And it is such an important thing because our parents really had to move countries. They left their parents behind in India. And it was like a whole new journey for them. They totally had to start over. Honestly, like I've been in the same town for like the last 10 years. I could not imagine moving to a completely different country, culture that I've never been really exposed to before, and just leaving my parents behind at home for decades on end. Um, what experiences have you had with thinking about that and that kind of dynamic in your household?
Yeah, no. I definitely agree with what you said about the whole like boundaries with regarding like makeup and things like that cuz over time my parents have definitely chilled out a little bit more. Maybe it's because like they realize that I'm like getting older and they need to like stop being so like strict because like there's only so much that they can really like tell me what to do and what not to do now that I'm like
Mm-hmm.
in my early 20s too. But with like sacrifices and everything, I know my parents have definitely sacrificed a lot, especially since they had to move from India to here, like just the two of them, like all on their own. They knew like no one here, and to make like all the connections, and they had to like my mom at least had to like basically learn like English like properly here and
Mm-hmm.
everything. So that must have been like very hard. And like they definitely like brought a lot of their like Indian values and I guess customs from that time. And I can tell they're still like trying to hold on to it, especially because my dad is also from like a very small like village in India. So even when we go back to India, like a lot of the mindsets and like customs and traditions, it's like the same because like the cities in India might have changed, but I feel like the small
Mm-hmm.
like villages not as much because like even my entire family on my dad's side, like everyone's very traditional and conservative, so he still has that same mindset. And since my mindset is a little bit more like modern, it's like it definitely clashes over time. But I think like since it's been like a few years since my parents have gotten used to me being kind of who I am and just like having the freedom to do things that I might not have had at home, they've definitely like are a little bit more like relaxed now and they're definitely more like okay with me slightly exploring like who I am and like what I want to do within like reason, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, they definitely carried a lot of the same values that there were during the time that they left. Um, I know that the conversation about parents having to struggle is such a big one, but it also sometimes feels as if because they struggled so much, there's a lot of expectation on you to make their struggle worth it, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, for
Mhm.
sure because sometimes I have this feeling where it's almost like I have to succeed. It's not like a
Mhm.
choice because since my parents sacrificed so much, like I have to succeed so it feels worth it to them
Mhm.
and I have to make them proud and it's just like added like pressure onto everything else because I'm sure we're all stressed with the things that we have to deal with, but sometimes it's like it almost feels like I'm carrying my parents like expectations and like their hopes like on me cuz
Mhm.
my mom has mentioned that like there's so many opportunities that like I've had and like I'm able to do that like she wanted, but she can't. And so because she can't, it's almost like
Like
I
you
have to do
have
it
to.
for her,
Mhm.
which I understand because of like she doesn't have the opportunity, I guess, now anymore. But it definitely like leads to like anxiety and just like never feeling like you're good enough, I guess, with
Mhm.
whatever it is that you're doing because you feel like no matter what you do, it's still not fully enough for your parents to like make them satisfied or happy. But
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly what I was going to say too. Like it's just that it's valid that they have high expectations of you, and I think that's a good thing when someone has high expectations of you. But I don't think it's always healthy to the point where if you're not ever feeling like you're enough and you're not ever getting that validation that like okay, like you're doing okay, like you are fine where you are right now, and when you don't get that, it feels like you're in just in this rat race competing with everyone around you. And I mean, as we all know, like Indians can be very competitive. And again, like yeah, my mom will always be like, "Oh, there's kids in India that will never get to have chances like this. You guys have everything." you need to do so much more. But after a point, it's just like, I'm not a superhuman. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's only so much you can do before you like burn out.
Exactly. Like, of course, like there could be so many more things I could be doing, and I want to do more too. But at the same time, I think we need to be more forgiving on ourselves. As long as we're trying our best and we're focused, I think it's okay because, I mean, everyone has their own capacity. And if you push too much beyond that, you're only just going to break. Like, we're not machines just made for generating like profits or medals or certificates. We're people.
Yeah, and I feel like, at least with me, I feel like sometimes my parents don't understand that you have to give yourself like time to rest and recuperate instead of just like constantly like being on the go and like doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like sometimes with my parents, like if they see me resting or just like having fun, they see that I'm just goofing off. But instead, I'm just like, that's just like how I like recuperate with stress and like, because I feel like if I don't have the downtime, then I don't even, like, I'm not at my, like, I'm not able to work properly and get everything that I need to done.
Mm-hmm.
But my parents just see it as me goofing off when that's not really the case.
Yeah, exactly. Like this constant, like, go, go, go culture. But the thing is, like, if you keep rushing through everything, if everything is just like, oh, what am I supposed to be doing next? Like, I'm so stressed out, your life is going to pass you by so fast. You won't even know what hit you. Because you can only enjoy your life if you do slow down. We're not on this planet for that long. That sounds kind of morbid. But truly, like, these few years, especially in the youth that we have right now, you have to spend that time to enjoy your life as well. I guess it's always like work hard, play hard. But if you're always like, what's coming next, then you're never in the moment. If you're never in the present, you're not experiencing time the way you should be. Like that's when life will start going by, the years will start like flying past you. And yeah, like I just think this constant hustle culture is so toxic because before you know it, you're going to be 50 years old with
Yeah,
like a sore like back, and you're going to think like, where did all those years go? What did I even do other than what? Get like make your parents proud. I mean, you should make your parents proud. But like, what did you do other than just get a job and, I don't know, do what's expected of you society wise?
yeah, you don't want to look back and regret that you should have had more fun or you should have like done more with your life because at that point you might not be able to do that.
Mhm.
And I feel like regret is something that's like so hard to live with. So I feel like it would just make more sense to just make the best out of your time and
Mhm.
obviously like do what you should be doing, like get good
Yeah.
grades or whatever. But I think like having fun and just like making those memories is very important too.
Mhm. And that really reminds me because like of the Winter Olympics last month, I guess if you guys were paying attention to the sports or anything, like um I think Alyssa Liu and Eileen Gu, like these are two sportsmen that or sportswomen that really made the headlines big because they won gold in both their sports. And I personally learned a lot from them in this aspect because especially through Alyssa Liu, like she was talking about how she took rest from figure skating. And once she took the rest, she came back and she won gold for the US, which is really great. And she was talking about how she likes to stay in the moment and she just likes to have fun with whatever she's doing. I think what her words were like, you can't lose if you're having fun. And I think as a society, we really need to adopt that, especially as Indians, because it's almost as if Indian culture, it romanticizes like suffering, as in like, you have to be giving it your all, you have to be like working so hard to yourself, beating yourself to the ground. And that's just like, what's the point in that? Like if you're having fun, you can work better, you can be healthier, and life just starts just glowing. Like you won't have things won't feel like a drag if you're actually having fun with it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because I feel like putting in that much work and just like time like constantly,
Hmm.
that's just gonna lead to burnout, and then you're not gonna be able to do your work properly like in the future because
Hmm.
you won't have the energy for it. I just feel
Exactly.
like as a society, like there needs to be more balance for
Hmm.
sure.
I think not just with our parents, but in the social circles we are in as well, with all the other like Indian families and stuff. One thing that haunts most people is looking like they're not capable in front of other people. And I think that's a big thing because if you fail at something, it feels like, oh my God, like all these people are going to know that I failed at this. I'm going to get talked about. I'm going to get laughed at. And you're just going to be part of the gossip, which often it honestly does happen. Like a lot of these people, they do talk about things. But I think one thing is it's just like, it's your life. I mean, these people don't know you at the end of the day. Like, if they're that miserable that they're all they do is talk about people, like let them be miserable. And I think one thing that helps me with my thinking is that like you can't be scared of failure because of what other people are going to say about you, because when you're scared of failure, that's when you start operating from like a lack mindset. And when you're in that mindset, it feels as if everything's on the line. When you're doing something, you start attaching so much worth to it, so much value to it, that even just the thought of failing scares you so much. But when you're doing things out of that mindset, you're never going to be able to do anything properly. You're never going to be able to do anything to the highest potential that you can because you're not relaxed. Some of the best work that you'll ever do comes from when you're relaxed. So I think the mindset to go about with this is that you need to know that you'll be okay regardless of what your parents think of you, regardless of what your peers think of you, and what other social circles think of you. You just got to think to yourself, I have me, and even if I fail, that's okay because I can get up somehow. I'll be okay somehow. I think that's what really helps me with this. But anyways, leading on from that, again, like, do you ever get feel stuck between expectations of other people and your own personal goals? Like, has have they ever clashed that you've wanted something out of your life, like say pursuing a certain hobby or something else that your parents have kind of brushed aside?
Yeah, it's not very big. It's nothing big, but it's more just like things that I wanted to do maybe with like friends or just like things I want to do like on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, I'm like pre-med, and so I'm planning on taking a gap year before med school. And
Mm-hmm.
my parents like they have like this big idea. They have this idea that like if I take a gap year, I'm just wasting my time, and they
Mm-hmm.
want me to go straight into med school. And at this point, it's too late for that, obviously. But like a few years ago, when we were having that conversation, they were like, "What will people think if you're just wasting your time like doing nothing in between like undergrad and med school?" And I always just felt like it's your life. Like you know what is the best for you, and no one else knows how you truly feel. And obviously with like parents it's different because like they're always there for you, and they're also like they spent like so much time like investing in your life and everything, so you can't just like I guess ignore them and do whatever you want to do. But with that, like at least with my med school like dilemma, like I had to just like explain to my parents that it was like normal, and like just because I want to take like a year or two like in between I mean undergrad and med school, it doesn't feel like I'm wasting my life away. And it doesn't really matter what other people think because it's my life and I'm living it, and it's going to affect me more than anyone else. And at the end of the day, like when I become a doctor, it's not going to matter how many years like it took, you know? Like that
Mm-hmm.
would be the accomplishment.
Exactly. Like, okay, you're gonna become a doctor at 32 versus 30. is that really that big of a difference?
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't
It's
really
really not.
matter.
Yeah, like as long as say you can have so many different experiences in your gap years. Like you don't have to stay at home. You can go travel, you can do experiences like in different cities, anything you want. Personally in my gap year, I was talking to you about this earlier,
Yeah.
but I really want to explore all the things that I didn't get to do in any other part of my life. Especially like when you're in school constantly, especially from I'd say like maybe 8th grade to now, you never really have time to just explore the interests that you wanted to do, like maybe when you were a child. Like I wanted to learn how to ice skate when I was little. I really wanted to do figure skating when I was like 6 years old, but I never got to do that. And like maybe in my gap year, I can learn how to ice skate. Maybe not figure skating, but just like at least like something. I wanted to learn how to play guitar. Like there's certain things that you can make time for and you can really enrich your life with. And that's the point of living, just to learn as much as you can. In my opinion, that's what we're here for. Like I mean, yeah, going straight into medical school has its advantages. But then again, like, are you making time for yourself? Like, are you living actually? Or are you just following a path in
And
some, yeah,
surviving.
and surviving? Are you living or are you just surviving? That's a huge thing for me. I think, I mean, we always see, especially our 20s, as this kind of like itinerary. Like, oh, graduate college, check. Get into grad school, check. Get married, check. Have kids, check. Like stuff like that. But it's like, where's the, I don't know, life in that?
Yeah, you should definitely like do things to make you happy and just
Mm-hmm.
like make the most out of life because especially when you're not in school and you're going to have like a very like stressful career ahead of you, like that's your time to just like spend time doing hobbies that you want to learn or just like activities or just hobbies or anything in general that will like make you happy and something that maybe you can like carry with you when like life gets very stressful. Because
Mm-hmm.
I know like in high school I had so many hobbies. Like I would paint a lot, I'll
Mm-hmm.
play the viola, I used to also crochet, things like that. But now with like everything going on with like classes, MCAT and stuff, I just don't have the time for it anymore. But in my gap year I'm hoping to do that again because it definitely did help with my mental health. Like painting and even just reading a book like would calm me down so much.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I think, especially with what I was saying earlier, like the kind of I guess, itinerary or like timeline that we think we're supposed to have. I think that's like a huge thing in Indian culture that you have to do this by this time. And if you don't do this, then you're waste. Like, you suck.
Exactly.
And it's just like, who are we performing for? Who is our audience? There's no one watching us. And honestly, anyone who is watching you like with full attention like has no life. Cuz anyone who has a full plate, who has goals and dreams for themselves, they're too busy focusing on themselves to think about you. Anyone worth your time isn't out here like having an eye on everyone and thinking about what they're doing. So really, you don't have any audience. It's just you on stage. You can do whatever you want. And there's no one grading you based on what time in your life you're doing certain things. And I think it's really important to break out of that because we have to live with happiness. That's why we're alive. Like what's the point of anything if you're not doing it with happiness?
Yeah, no, for sure. Sometimes my mom will talk about like what will people think or what will people say, and I just don't understand that mindset because
Mhm.
why does it matter what others think when it's my life and what I do has like won't affect them, you know? Like it's different
Exactly.
I guess if it's family,
Mhm.
but if it's just like random like people, like your family, friends or someone,
Mhm.
like I don't understand like why what they think or what they believe about certain things has to affect how I act.
Exactly. And let them make fun of you for doing something. It's just like anyone who is worth listening to is not someone who would say those type of things.
Yeah, for sure.
Like so again, it doesn't even matter what people think. Like if someone has a healthy mindset and you're doing something that enriches your life, they would be happy for you.
Yeah, for sure. I think it also sometimes comes down to maybe like jealousy or something.
Mhm.
Like they're worried that like other people might feel like if they're talking like making those type of statements, it's maybe because they're jealous about you or
Mhm.
jealous about what you've accomplished or anything.
Yeah.
But that's just like not good like energy that you should be like dealing with. Like I feel like even with like friends too and stuff, like I've noticed that sometimes they can just be very jealous about like what you've accomplished and like you shouldn't have to like deal with that type of like mentality. Like it's not
Exactly.
good for you too.
Mhm. Yeah. And yeah, I guess you should definitely distance yourself from people who are like that. Like me personally, don't like to go to a lot of like these parties that different aunties host and stuff because I think at the point in time I am right now, applying to medical school and such, it's just not good energy to have like people constantly asking you like, oh, what's going on, what score did you get, like all those questions, because they're not asking it because they're like genuinely excited for you. They're just trying to place you in whatever like mental structure that they put other people in. Like, oh, is this person smart or are they dumb or like stuff like that. And that's just not the energy that you need. And those type of experiences, they affect how you think about yourself. And that becomes your internal dialogue, and then that becomes your behaviors, and that becomes who you are. Like, you always should put yourself in positive spaces. And I think that relates back to your parents because it you really have to hold that like delicate balance between like trying to be a good daughter or son and prioritizing yourself, because although your parents are always like there for you, you also need to make certain decisions for yourself, as in like if they're speaking too negatively, I think it's okay to kind of maybe not shut those conversations down when they are saying those things, but I think sometimes it's good to kind of like divert the topic so your own mindset doesn't get affected. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. Because sometimes with parents, like, I know they want the best for you and everything, but sometimes, like, they don't realize that what they're saying actually does the exact opposite, like, hurts
Mhm.
you more than they think. Like, they want to help you, but
Yeah.
instead it just ends up hurting you
Mhm.
and maybe, like demotivating you too from trying to achieve whatever it is that you want to do.
Mhm.
And sometimes, like, with parents, like, because they want the best for you and they will have, like, such high expectations, they also kind of force that upon you.
Mhm.
And then that just makes you, like, even more, like, demotivated to achieve
Exactly.
whatever it is that.
Exactly. I just don't think encouragement should be something that is harsh. I just don't think humans operate in that way. That's
Yeah.
just not how psychology works. Like, if you're yelling at someone to do something, they're most likely not going to do it.
Yeah, I just feel like Indian parents in general have this habit of just, like, yelling and lecturing and not maybe like gentle parenting. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that would come a long way because whenever my parents have in the past like sat down and calmly talked about whatever it is that was bothering them or wanted me to change, like I've definitely been more like receptive to that
Mm-hmm.
than when they're just yelling at me because at the end of the day when they're just yelling at me then I just feel even worse and I just
You just don't want to do what they're telling you to
yeah,
do even
exactly.
more.
Like I don't know, then like them yelling just irritates me more and then I just continue with the same behavior I have been doing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think placing those boundaries between you and your parents,
It can be very
it
hard,
can be
but it's
very
very
hard. It
important.
is very important. Like, it helps both of you guys stay happy and it maintains your relationship. If you don't have that, then you're going to end up living with a lot of resentment, and that can slowly kill the relationships in your life. So I definitely think like anything in life, this also needs balance. So balancing your American identity with your Indian identity, that is the key. And that's kind of hard, but I think it just comes with wisdom and it comes with age as well.
Yeah, for sure. Over time, it definitely gets easier to balance those two different identities.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to end up finishing our conversation for today. So if you connected with anything we talked about today, we just wanted to let you know that you're not alone. And so many people are navigating the same in between space, even if no one talks about it openly. This is the Healing Space with MannMukti, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.